there's another wide receiver conversation to have. According to 93.7 The Fans, Andrew Filipponi, T. Higgins has been a topic of conversation for the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. Excuse me. We've talked a lot about T. Higgins and a possibility that he comes to Pittsburgh. Obviously, you got the AFC North thing, which is probably going to be an T. Higgins said yesterday at his youth camp that he expects to play in Cincinnati. I mean, is T. Higgins even like a real thing? Like, even if they are talking about it, what are those conversations? Like, should anybody get excited that if Brandon Aiyuk doesn't work out, T. Higgins is a possibility for the Steelers?
I don't think so. I think that'd be getting your hopes up for really not a very good reason in my book, quite honestly. I mean, you bring up the AFC North thing like that, and but the other side of it is that the T. Higgins contract situation, I think, is a lot more urgent than it is for the Aiyuk thing. I mean, there's a way to make Brandon Aiyuk affordable for the Steelers. There's not really an option to make T. Higgins affordable. I mean, playing on the franchise tag, that's a boatload of money, and then you add in whatever extension you might want to sign him to or that he would demand, and that's quite a bit to give up. And that's on top of, you know, what you might have to trade to convince an AFC North rival to give you one of their best players, you know, easily, like they're one of their top 2 or 3 on the offensive side of the ball.
3 players if you include Joe Burrow on that list.
Yeah. So you'd really be asking for a lot from them, and I think the Bengals would ask for a lot in return, and it just all add up to a little bit too much for me. And just like you put T. Higgins and Brandon Aiyuk side by side, and you put like everything that they would cost, everything that you'd have to go through to acquire either player, and I'm not even looking at T. Higgins unless I know that there's absolutely no chance of getting Brandon Aiyuk. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to add T. Higgins versus, well, like, especially when another guy, like, that's always going to be the comparison now. It's just Aiyuk versus Higgins. You know, the Steelers need one of them if they want to be a real contender, and only one I think really makes sense at this point.
I don't even think T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins is phenomenal, but Brandon Aiyuk like makes you like a real, this is crazy. T. Higgins is like, wow, that's a really good move. That's a really you got a really good wide receiver. And I'm not trying to like downplay T. Higgins. I just think T. Higgins has been a number 2 behind a phenomenal number 1, like one of the best number 1s in football with an incredible quarterback. And don't get me wrong, Brandon Aiyuk has done a lot of the same, but Brandon Aiyuk has made a lot out of at sometimes a little, like a Jimmy Garoppolo type situation, a Trey Lance type situation. Deebo Samuels was not, I mean, even this past season, Deebo was not Deebo. He did not have the Deebo year that everybody anticipated that he did. I think that, Brandon Aiyuk for years, Brandon Aiyuk has been like one of the most undervalued wide receivers in the NFL. And I think T. Higgins is phenomenal, but T. Higgins might max out as the best number 2, like just in terms of where they are currently right now. You're guessing that T. Higgins can be a number 1, that you could be the guy. You know for certain Brandon Aiyuk is your number 1. You know for a fact that if you traded for Brandon Aiyuk, he's a guy that's going to come in here and just be a superstar right off the bat. And he's probably looking for something like that. That's what he wants. And T. Higgins wants an opportunity to do the same. Maybe he will. I just think neck and neck. I'm putting Brandon Aiyuk talent and performance-wise a little bit, not a ton, a little tiny bit above T. Higgins. And just cost-wise, you're spot on. $21 million to keep T. Higgins this season under the franchise tag. You could obviously sign him before, I think, June 15th. But you're going to sign him for more than $21 million, which means that you're paying him more than $21 million this season, which completely eliminates the whole thing with Brandon Aiyuk of go all in this season. Cool. Only now you got to come up with $25 million. I don't know. I don't think it's the best move for the Steelers. And I think it'd be a good move, but if there's real traction with Aiyuk, I don't even want to have the conversation to Higgins.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, to your point about, Aiyuk versus Higgins and their situation, like Brandon Aiyuk put up more than 1,300 yards on a team that also had Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, and Deebo Samuel. Like, even if Deebo took a step back last year, it was partially because Brandon Aiyuk had the most insane year that he's had of his entire career. And this guy is like in the middle of his prime right now. It's not we're waiting on him to develop. Like, that's the other thing. Like, T. Higgins, like, he's still a work in progress, you know? Like, even if he's really good right now, he's still got a ways to go before he, hits the ceiling. Like, right now, Brandon Aiyuk is Brandon Aiyuk, and he is who he is, one of the best receivers in the NFL. There's no guessing about it, Like,
Nope.
there's no guessing about what Brandon Aiyuk would be on this team, Like, he would be, like, he would be the number one, right? Like, he's not.
Yeah, no,
like George,
definitely,
like
definitely.
as much as we all love George, like he's not there yet. He's not Brandon Aiyuk level just yet. I think he can get there, but he's not there right yet. So like you've seen Brandon Aiyuk be a number one on a winning team at that too. And you just haven't seen that same thing from T. Higgins. So the idea, I mean, and T. Higgins like costs you more. Like that's the crazy thing. It's like it's just wild. Like you put guys in certain situations, it becomes less about their talent and about their production and more about, oh, well, who got paid last, which wide receiver was signed before them. Did they get put on the franchise tag? Did they get asked out? Are they under contract? Like all these weird things start getting mixed up and you get into a situation where Brandon Aiyuk is going to cost you a lot less than a T. Higgins. That's pretty crazy.
That's exactly. That's exactly. You are paying, just to break it down, very exactly what you said, but just to break it down in a very simple sentence here, is you are underpaying Brandon Aiyuk in 2024, drastically underpaying Brandon Aiyuk, and you are taking a risk to not overpay T. Higgins in 2024. That's as simple as it gets. You are, like, even at $14 million, Brandon Aiyuk is a steal. Like, you just traded Deontay Johnson for Brandon Aiyuk, and it didn't cost you any money. Like, that's wild. Whereas in T. Higgins, you start off on a ceiling where you're like, $20 million for T. Higgins? Is that? Are you feeling really good about that? I don't know just yet. And I think the potential's there. And we had this conversation with Deontay Johnson. You pay guys for what's coming, not what is. To get a guy who is already here and you're paying him way less than what it is, I mean, that's as good as it gets. I just don't think there's no comparison. And there's other, like, I think if it's not Aiyuk, you take a step back and you go, like, who are the other options that are like lesser than these guys? And like, I tossed out Davante Adams. I think Davante Adams could be a great move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think he's as good as Brandon Aiyuk, and I think that outside of him, maybe I would consider like the second tier guys, like the Cortland Suttons and the John Mechie's and the Noah Browns and those kind of guys, before I went out and tried to make a move for a T. Higgins that, T. Higgins never really made a ton of sense to me in the first place. It just, and again, like what the Bengals are going to ask for, they're not going to be like, oh, second round pick for all yours, pal. No chance. It's going to be like, all right, we'll take 3 firsts and your second born child. We don't even want your first. Give us your second.
Right. Well, and Higgins, I think the difference is crazy because Higgins hasn't really been like a headache for the Bengals, like this is not a guy who I think is like desperate to get out of Cincinnati or anything. Like it seems much more amicable than what the 49ers are going through with Aiyuk, and that I don't think either side is helping each other out, but Higgins isn't like tanking his value or anything, like there aren't leaked reports about him wanting out or anything like that. Like that changes the narrative quite a bit, and that changes the value by extension. If you just know that guys don't want to be in a certain place. I like that's the thing. Like, do you think like this could last? Like with Aiyuk, like do you think it could last all the way through like into training camp? Like, is he going to hold in? Like how long do you think this could last?
I would imagine Aiyuk definitely holds in or holds out. Would 100% think that that's what happens. Whereas, and if he comes to Pittsburgh, he's not going to hold out. They're going to have those conversations with him already. They're going to have the conversations before the trade. Like, hey, look, this is where we expect to be. That's why when it comes to like when it's going to happen, I have no idea, because I think it could come right down to the final hour of the NFL draft. I think it could come down to between day 1 and day 2 of the NFL draft, where that's when they make a move. But I wouldn't be surprised if for some crazy reason this went into July or the end of July, August, and the Steelers are finally like, all right, yeah, if you look, he's not going to play for you, so you might as well just send him to us, and we'll give you a second round pick next year. I think that all of those are real possibilities. But I don't have no idea what a timeline would be, but I don't expect him to play unless they're going to sign him to a contract. And they've done this before with Debo, and They had one other one where it was a real late. San Francisco had another one where it was real late, right down to the wire, hard nose. This is a negotiation.
Was it Trent Williams? Was it an offensive lineman, or am I?
It might have been Trent Williams. Trent Williams.
Either way,
I don't remember.
I remember what you're talking about, though. I don't remember the actual player, but I know what you're referencing.
Yeah, and they've done this before, and they can pull it off again. I don't doubt that they can't pull it off again, but I wouldn't imagine he shows up to training camp on day one if he does not have a new deal. And that's when, if it doesn't happen, don't let it die. Like, it's not the hope, the dream of Brandon Aiyuk, for everybody who's dreaming about it. It's not dead if the draft comes and goes. It's still very, very much, it's alive until a contract is inked in San Francisco.
I mean, someone literally, a 49ers executive literally said it was dead 2 weeks ago, and it was not dead. So I don't think you can count this out really at any point.
No. It's alive, and again, quote unquote, would be surprised if it didn't happen. So we're just kind of waiting, and we'll see when it does happen.